Proteins are the third macromolecule that we have to talk about, and the main function of our proteins is that there is no main function. So you'll see here in a second why we're saying there's no main function, because proteins do so much for our body. They're so versatile that we can't limit it down to one thing. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the fact that they act as enzymes, and enzymes are things that can control the rate of biochemical reactions. We will talk more about enzymes, but they are something that speed up the reaction time, which allows all of the body reactions we have to occur. Next, we have proteins acting as hormones, and hormones are things that regulate cell processes. So an example of this would be insulin, and we know that insulin is something that regulates our blood sugar levels. Proteins are used for a variety of different things structurally in our body, but they make up bones and muscles. So an example of this could be collagen. We use proteins as a source of transportation, and they're transporting substances in and out of cells. So an example could be hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is used in our blood cells to carry oxygen. We also have proteins on all of our cells, and these are called antibodies, and they help immune systems fight diseases. Antibodies are like identifying cells or proteins, and they help us determine if this is our cells or if it's a foreign cell. We can also use proteins as a source of movement, and these are contractile proteins that are seen inside our muscles. We also have receptor proteins that aid in cell signaling, and cell signaling is a process that allows the cells in your body to communicate with one another. And lastly, we have proteins acting as an energy source in the food that we eat. So an example of this that I have here is casein, and this is the protein that's actually found in milk. But if you notice, I put energy source way at the bottom of our list. There are so many other things you can do with proteins that we really don't want to use them as a food source, but we can if we need to. So now, as we're looking at proteins and examples, if we look at our pictures over here first, we have glasses of milk, we have what looks like some ribs maybe, and some nuts. So we can find proteins in a variety of different places, but the most obvious is things like meats, nuts, and dairy products. But we also have proteins that get made in your body. So you can actually make proteins in your cells for yourself as long as you have all the proper nutrients. The monomer of our proteins is something that we call amino acids. And this is a detailed structure of it here. But again, monomer is our small unit. The polymer that makes up proteins is called a polypeptide. And a polypeptide is essentially an amino acids or chain of amino acids linked together by a peptide bond. So that's what we have in this picture here, where each of these different colors is its different amino acid linked together with all of these different peptide bonds. If we talk about energy storage for proteins, they are giving us 4 calories per gram. So 4 calories is the same as our carbohydrates, but proteins do so much for the body that they are usually the last resort if we're needing energy. So again, we said there's all those other functions for proteins that we really don't want to use them as energy storage unless we have to. As we said, for proteins, our monomer is amino acids and the polymer for proteins is a polypeptide, but that's not quite yet to a fully functioning protein. So proteins are the most diverse macromolecule in terms of structure and in function, as we saw. So we're going to talk a little bit about protein structure here. So there's 4 different levels to the structure of a protein. So if we start at the most simple part, that is our primary structure, and that is our simple chain of amino acids. So that is our polypeptide here. We have all of our amino acids being linked together. From here, we can look at our secondary structure, and our secondary structure is that same one chain of amino acids, our polypeptide, but now we have kind of folded it and coiled it up into this different structure. After we have that coil, we can move on to our tertiary structure, and we're taking that same coil that we just had and now we're bundling it up a little more. And then from there, we can move to our quaternary structure. And quaternary, so if you haven't noticed, we have primary as in 1, secondary as in 2, tertiary as in 3. Quaternary is for 4. And there's actually now 4 different separate chains of our polypeptides here, making an entire complete one protein. And if you take anatomy with me, you will often hear me say that form dictates function, meaning that the shape of the protein determines what it does. So the form or the shape determines its function. So the different ways they all get folded up is going to determine what the proteins do in your body. And last but not least, we have nucleic acids. This is the last of the 4 macromolecules we need to talk about. And the main function for our nucleic acids is that they are informational molecules that store, transmit, and express our genetic information. Your genetic information contains the instructions for making proteins. And as we saw, it really is your proteins that make you you. There's so many uses for them in your body. When we are looking at examples of nucleic acids, there are only 2 in existence. There is DNA and RNA. Those are the only ones. And as you see here, you get them from your parents and not from your food. So if we think about it, this is DNA. We know that all living things have DNA. When you eat corn, you're not incorporating corn's DNA into your own DNA, right? You're just digesting it. You get your DNA that makes you, you from your parents and not the things that you eat. The structure of DNA is a little complicated, and it is something that we'll spend a lot of time on throughout the school year. But the monomer, or the small unit for nucleic acids, is something that we call nucleotides. There are a bunch of different structures that can make up a nucleotide. We call these adenine, guanine, thymine, cytosine, and uracil. You can also see here that we have bolded each of these first letters, and that's because they often get abbreviated just as the first letter. So I could call adenine simply A. All of these different nucleotides are made up of this structure over here, and in this structure, we have a 5-carbon sugar, and that's what you can see as this little pentagon guy here. 5 carbon, it has 5 sides. They all have a phosphate group, and that is this little phosphate over here, and they also have a nitrogen containing base, and that would be this side over here. The polymer for your nucleic acids is simply just the entire nucleic acid. There's no in-between step here, so it's either going to be DNA or RNA. And lastly, let's talk about the energy storage. You get 0 calories per gram. Why 0? It's made of sugar. How the heck can it be 0? And that's because, as we said, they never get broken down as a source of energy, right? You get them from your parents, so we are simply just breaking them down with our food, and we don't store them for anything. We're only using their function as storing and transmitting genetic information.